Good evening, everybody. It is your friendly neighborhood college and career counselor, Mr. Cook, here with our third event in our College 101 series. If you've been riding with us, we've already visited how to pick the best pathway for yourself, how to make your application stand out, and now we're rounding this out, trying to figure out how to fund your post-secondary education. So welcome everybody that is on this evening. I want to let you know that tonight we are recording this session. We will drop that information down in the chat for you to be able to access it should you arrive late this evening or you want to revisit it this evening. And before we get into who our presenter is, there are a few housekeeping items that we want to make sure that we run through. First and foremost, we want to thank all of our partners. As you can see, we have multiple school districts on here, multiple organizations on here that all came together to provide this series of presentations to make sure that you get the information that you need to make the best informed decision possible as it relates to your post-secondary education. So we would be remiss if we did not thank all of our partners that you see here on the screen. So thank you, everybody that came together for this. Next, we want to talk about how to take advantage of the experts that are on this evening. So while I'm here moderating and we're going to pass it off to our content expert this evening, there are people in the background that are working on answering questions. So if you have one during the session, type them into the Q&A box. You can access that by selecting the icon in the top right corner of your computer and type in your question just so that you know it remains private. So it's just, y'all and us in the background. If it's a commonly asked question, we will push it public so that everybody can see it because there's more than one people asking that question, right? So don't be scared to ask any questions. And then as always, we have time at the end of the session where we'll answer questions that maybe we couldn't get to or questions that were commonly asked that we want to make sure that we speak up about. All right, so please make sure to take advantage of that. And lastly, tonight's presentation is provided in closed captions. So for those of you that are hearing impaired, we just want to encourage you to select the CC logo at the bottom right of your screen so that you can take advantage of this opportunity to follow along as we present this evening. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our content area expert tonight. She goes by the name of Dr. That's right, I said it. Dr. Karima Mansell. She is the Associate Director for the Office of Student Financial Assistance at the University of Central Florida. She also had a similar role as this for FAMU. And as rumor has it, she's also a wonderful public speaker. So with no further ado, we want to pass it off to our content area expert tonight to talk to you about all things financial aid minded.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Mr. Cook. I'm going to go ahead and get started with tonight's presentation. I would always like to start with, I know that sometimes the financial aid process can cause our students and our families a bit of angst and anxiety. It can be a bit confusing if you've never done it before. The entire purpose of tonight's session is to relieve you of some of that. So I am going to start with a PowerPoint presentation to guide our conversation, but I will definitely save time at the end to answer your questions. I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen and we'll go from there. Right. So when it comes to financial aid, we use a few key terms, and that terminology can sometimes be a little bit difficult to chart for students and families. So I always like to start with that baseline so that we all know what we're talking about when we use some of this terminology. And financial aid is a process that students engage in year after year. So one of my other goals with the presentation is to provide you with information that you won't just use in your senior year, but you'll use in all of the years that you are pursuing post-secondary education. So the first term is the Fafsa. The Fafsa is the free application for federal student aid. And I want to reiterate, it is a free application, so you should never pay to have the Fafsa completed. It can be completed at studentaid.gov or fafsa.gov. If you land on a site that's charging you to do the Fafsa, you are in the wrong place. So you want to make sure you navigate back to one of the U.S. Department of Education website where you can access the Fafsa. When you complete the FAFSA, you're going to get a number. That number is called the expected family contribution. The expected family contribution is based on the information the family provides on the FAFSA, and it determines the monetary amount that a family can contribute to a student's education. This number is important because it helps to determine the type of aid for which a student qualifies to receive. There's also another number that's very important, and that's called the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance varies from one institution to the other. The cost of attendance is the budget allotted to a student based on a variety of factors. At our state institutions, our state universities, and our state colleges, the cost of attendance, or COA, is going to be based on a student's enrollment, residency, and housing status. If the student is attending a non-state institution, a private entity, then the residency status is not a component of the cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is really important to understand, particularly when a student is evaluating their financial aid summaries or their financial aid offers from different schools, because you want to look at what it costs to attend that particular school versus your financial aid package at that school and the type of financial aid package you're receiving at that school. Do you have a combination of grants and scholarships along with student loans? Are you only getting loans at that particular institution? And then compare your package to what it costs to attend that school. So both the cost of attendance and the expected family contribution are key factors in determining a student's need and whether or not that student may be eligible for need-based aid, such as the subsidized loan at a particular institution. In financial aid, schools establish what we call a priority filing date. And the priority filing date is not a deadline by which a student should complete the FAFSA, but it is a date that is established by that particular school that allows the student to be considered for what we refer to as maximum financial aid consideration. It doesn't guarantee the student any particular awards per se, but there are some programs that are limited. And in order to be equitable in the distribution of limited funds, schools establish a specific date where students may get more consideration for certain limited funds. So it's really important to file your FAFSA by the school's priority filing date each and every year so that you can get that maximum consideration. I have a slide that shows some of the common priority filing dates amongst some schools in Florida. I mentioned the subsidized loan when I talked about need. The subsidized loan is a need-based federal loan. If a student is eligible for the subsidized portion of the federal loan, then the student does not pay interest on that loan. While the student is enrolled at least half-time, the government pays the interest on behalf of the student during periods of half-time enrollment, as well as during periods of what we call grace, so that time frame in between when a student is no longer enrolled and when their loan becomes due. Unsubsidized loans, on the other hand, are available to students regardless of their expected family contribution. These are not need-based loans. A student just has to be eligible to receive federally funded aid in order to receive the unsubsidized loan. So this is aid available to families regardless of income or other factors that determine the expected family contribution. However, the unsubsidized portion of the federally funded student loan does accrue interest once it is dispersed to the student's account. And then my last term is prior year. So this is a term that I did not coin. It was coined by the U.S. Department of Education, but it simply means that when the FAFSA is being completed, we're using financial information from 2 years before when that school year is starting. And I have a chart to show you when you'll be using what tax year based on which FAFSA you're completing. So the FAFSA is a financial aid application. It is the federal application. It is the application that we use to determine federal eligibility, but many institutions utilize the FAFSA to determine institutional eligibility as well. It must be completed each and every year. So the FAFSA is an annual application. It becomes available on October 1st each year. So it's already available for the 23-24 year. So you can go ahead and get that done. We do encourage students and families to complete the FAFSA electronically at fafsa.gov or studentaid.gov, and both our students and families will need what we call an Fsa Id. That's a federal student aid ID. And essentially, the FAFSA is going to request both student and parental demographic information for dependent students, as well as financial information, and we use it to determine eligibility for financial aid. In some cases, if a family is really wanting to do a paper FAFSA, and I'm going to say this, we do not encourage it. However, you can contact the Department of Education and get a paper FAFSA if needed, but we do encourage our families to complete the FAFSA electronically. So as I mentioned, the FAFSA becomes available on October 1st each and every year. And remember, it's using financial information from 2 years prior. So you should have that year's taxes already done. You don't have to wait on anything. You can go ahead and get it done as early as October 1st. And so we want to make sure we meet those priority filing dates. So this is just what the FAFSA website looks like. We're on studentaid.gov here, and you can see all of the various steps for the financial aid process. You want to gather the documents you need and go ahead and complete the FAFSA. And I do have a list of those documents that will be helpful in completion of the FAFSA and a few more slides. Once a student does the FAFSA, they get what we call the SAR, or the Student Aid Report. The Student Aid Report is going to outline the information that you inputted on the FAFSA and then share with you the type of aid for which the student may be eligible. But it's not the financial aid offer. So it might say, based on the information you provided on the FAFSA, you appear eligible for student loans, or you appear eligible for the Pell Grant. But each school is going to create a financial aid offer for the student based on the resources that school has to offer the student. So in addition to the federal resources that school may have, state or institutional resources that are included in a student's financial aid package. So you want to take a look at that package. And again, going back to when I was talking about the cost of attendance, you want to compare the packages and see what you're going to end up as your net cost at a particular institution. So you want to look at the cost of attendance at that particular school versus the financial aid package you're being offered at that school. Based on the financial aid you're being offered, you want to make sure that you take all of the necessary steps at the school you attend in order to receive your aid. That often means monitoring your email account and monitoring your student portal at that school to ensure that you've submitted everything that you need to submit to get your financial aid disbursement in a timely manner. And then, as I mentioned before, the FAFSA is an annual form, so we want you to reapply for that each and every year, and it becomes available on October 1st. I'm going to keep reiterating that. So I mentioned the Federal Student Aid ID, or the FSA ID. This is a username and password combination that's assigned to individuals to access their information for the FAFSA and other aspects of federally funded student aid. This serves as a personally identifiable piece of information, so I want you to hold this close, near and dear to you. This is not information that you share with other individuals, and both our students and our parents need their own FSA ID. Parents, if you've ever completed a FAFSA electronically for a student in the past, a previous student, a sibling, you're using the same FSA ID that you've used in the past. If you've ever done your own FAFSA electronically, you're using your same FSA ID. Your FSA ID follows you. For our students, if this is your first FAFSA, you're going to go ahead and apply for an FSA ID. And you can do that by visiting studentaid.gov and logging in and creating your FSA ID account. You will need your social security number as well as your own mobile phone number and or email address. And once you create your FSA ID, you're going to use it to complete your FAFSA. If you decide to borrow loans, you're going to use it to complete your loan counseling, as well as sign your master promissory note. Again, this is going to be a tool that follows you for a long time, so it's important to get it and guard it. And if you ever forget your FSA ID information, it can be easily retrieved on the website. You can they'll send you an email to get that information. So I mentioned prior year before, but I wanted to show you what that actually looks like in real life. So the vast majority of our students and families on this particular session will be completing the FAFSA that just opened on October 1st of 2022. That FAFSA is going to be valid for the 23-24 year, and it's going to use tax information from 2021. You may need to complete more than one FAFSA though. So if a student is considering attending school in the summer of 2023, so if you're maybe going to start a bridge program or get a head start at a state college or university, you're gonna need to more than likely also do the 22-23 FAFSA that is now available and can be completed with tax information from 2020. So if you know you're going to go in the summer, you can go ahead and knock out both FAFSAs now And then the FAFSA for the 24-25 year, which sounds so far away, that becomes available on October 1st of 2023. So right now, the two FAFSAs that you can do are the 22-23 FAFSA if you're attending summer school, and the 23-24 FAFSA is for all of our seniors to go ahead and get that completed as soon as possible. So we know that students are digital natives and you always have your phone in your hand. So you can use the My Student Aid mobile app to do so many things, including manage your Fsa Id, view your loan history, access your FAFSA. All of this can be done just by your phone. So as we're talking about completing the FAFSA, you want to gather all those documents you need. If you're a pen and paper person, you can print what we call a FAFSA on the web worksheet, and that will allow you to kind of walk through the FAFSA before doing it. If you do not have an Fsa Id for both our students and our parents, you want to go ahead and get that done as soon as possible. You also want to know how you're going to sign your FAFSA. You can use your Fsa Id to sign the FAFSA electronically. That is how we encourage our students and families to sign the FAFSA. That's what I would share with you and want you to do. However, you do have the option to print and sign a signature page. That does delay the processing of your FAFSA, though, if you choose to sign the FAFSA with a wet signature. And then you want to make note of important deadlines. So I wanted to share just a few priority deadlines that are common in the Florida sphere here. At UCF, our priority deadline is December 1st. As well as FSU. University of Florida has a priority filing date of December 15th, with USF following shortly thereafter, as well as FAMU with January 1st, and then FIU with March 1st. And I share this because I don't know where you're thinking about attending, but what I will tell you is you want to get the FAFSA done by the earliest priority filing date, because you want all of the schools to get that information by their priority filing date. Again, the FAFSA is available. There's nothing stopping you from doing it right now. So you want to go ahead and get it done as soon as possible to, again, increase the likelihood of meeting as many schools' priority filing date as possible. When you're completing the FAFSA, there is some information you're going to need to gather. Our students need a valid Social Security number in order to complete the FAFSA. So I want to ensure that students understand that students must have a valid Social Security number in order to complete the FAFSA. Parents do not. So our parents don't necessarily need a Social Security number in order to submit a FAFSA on behalf of a student. If a parent does not have a Social Security number, doesn't reside as a permanent resident of the United States, that is okay. You can enter all zeros for your Social Security number. It's also handy to have your state issued identification for the student. That information is requested when the FAFSA is being completed, as well as the permanent resident card for if that's applicable. W-2 records for both parents of dependent students and the students if the students worked, any income tax information, records of child support paid as well as child support received, records of taxable earnings from federal work study or other need-based work programs, any grants and scholarships that are above that must be reported as the AGI. Needs to be readily available, current stocks, bonds, and other investment records, as well as current business and farm records and current bank statements. So those are useful tools. If you don't have all of that readily available when completing the FAFSA, you can make estimates and then go out and adjust them accordingly. But you do want to make sure that you answer the FAFSA to the best of your ability. So the FAFSA is available, and I should say for the 23-24 FAFSA, the IRS data retrieval tool is available. The IRS data retrieval tool is a feature that allows a student or parent, the tax filer, to exit the FAFSA for a moment, enter the IRS's website, and then transfer their tax information directly into the FAFSA. We absolutely encourage students and families to utilize the IRS data retrieval tool. It makes for a more seamless experience with filing the FAFSA, and it also allows students and families to have that information in the FAFSA, and if by chance you are selected for a process called verification, tax information wouldn't be requested. So I'm going to break up the FAFSA into sections based on the type of information that's collected. And so when you're completing the FAFSA, students are going to have to provide demographic information. Name, telephone number, address, social security number, and then students are going to be asked a question about their citizenship status. In order to be eligible for financial aid by way of the FAFSA, a student must be either a U.S. citizen, either by birth or naturalization, or an eligible non-citizen. An eligible non-citizen is a student who either holds a permanent resident card or meets one of the other following categories, such as refugee, asylee granted, parolee, T visas, Cuban Haitian entrants, and there are some residents of like the Marshall Islands and other territories that would qualify for citizenship as well. And what I'm going to do now is just kind of highlight some of the things that trip students and families up on the FAFSA. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about marital status. In the section of the FAFSA, when it's asking for marital status in the student section, it is actually asking for the student's marital status. So you want to indicate the student's marital status in that section. However, in the parental section, it is important to appropriately identify a parent's marital status. And I also want to just reiterate, and I'll bring this up again a little bit later in the presentation, if by chance a parent is remarried, that parent must include step-parent information, financial information on the FAFSA for the stepchild. The next section of the FAFSA is the student's financial information. This is going to include various aspects of students' financial information, such as income, assets, and so forth. What I will indicate is that for some of our students, they may not have a lot of information in this section, and that's okay, and that's to be expected. You can always indicate zeros if it is not applicable to the student. There are a set of questions on the FAFSA that outlines a student's dependency status for financial aid. Those questions are very specific, and if a student is unable to answer yes to these questions, to at least one of these questions, then the student is considered a dependent for financial aid purposes. However, there are times that on a case-by-case basis, a financial aid administrator can render a student independent based on a special circumstance, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But for the purposes of the FAFSA, when a student is completing the FAFSA, there are specific categories that deem a student independent for financial aid purposes. Solely being financially dependent and able to take care of oneself does not render them independent for financial aid. So in order to be independent, a student must be 24, married, a graduate student, meaning the student is pursuing a master's degree or higher, active duty military, a veteran. A student must have dependents that the student provides more than half of the dependent support. Either both parents are deceased or the student was in foster care or ward of the court after the age of 13. Emancipated minors and students who are in legal guardianships are considered independent for financial aid purposes, and students who are at risk for homeless or deemed homeless are able to apply as independent students. Students who don't fall into any of those categories, parental information is required on the FAFSA. For the FAFSA, a parent is either a biological or adoptive parent. So that's the terminology utilized to determine who is considered a legal parent for the FAFSA. So if someone adopted a student, then that is considered an adoptive parent and a legal parent for the FAFSA, and of course, biological parents. However, we do recognize there are some familial situations where a student may reside with a parental figure but not be legally adopted. That's when we start to talk about like dependency overrides, as I mentioned on the previous slide. Also, I just want to reiterate, if a biological parent or an adoptive parent has remarried, then that step parent's information must be included on the FAFSA. If a student has a situation where their parents are divorced or separated, the parent included on the FAFSA is the parent with whom the student resided with for the vast majority of the 12 months preceding the completion date of the FAFSA. If by chance there's an exact equal split, the student spent exactly 50% of the time with one parent and exactly 50% of the time with another parent, then the student would use the parent that provides more financial support. And if that's exactly 50-50, then the student would choose the parent based on another factor. I do want to talk about what a dislocated worker is, because this is a question on the FAFSA that also kind of trips people up. A dislocated worker is an individual who is either receiving unemployment benefits, has recently been laid off, is self-employed but now is unemployed due to an economic condition or natural disaster, is the spouse of an active duty member and has experienced loss of employment due to change in location, or a displaced homemaker who was someone who provided unpaid services but is now no longer able to do that and having trouble finding employment. In Section 5 of the FAFSA, you're going to provide information on the household size, number in college, and whether or not you participate in any income-based assistance programs. And then Section 6 allows a student to add up to 10 schools to the FAFSA based on who they would like to receive the results of the FAFSA. And as I mentioned before, we want to go ahead and make sure that FAFSA is signed. Wanted to mention another application type, and that is the CSS profile. The CSS profile is used at specific private institutions, and it's used to determine a student's need for institutional aid. If a student is considering a private college or university, this might be an additional application the student needs to complete in addition to the FAFSA, so I did want to mention that. So now that I've gone through the applications available, I want to talk a little bit about the type of aid available to assist students and families. So we divide financial aid into two categories. Gift aid, which is free money given to students to help with your educational expenses. Gift aid comes in the form of grants and scholarships. And then the other form of aid is what we call self-help aid. So students help themselves by either borrowing and knowing that they have to repay a portion of their financial aid package by way of student loans, or by student employment programs such as the student work study or the federal work study program that allows students to earn a biweekly paycheck as a part of their financial aid package. When it comes to scholarships, scholarships come from a variety of different sources. They're institutional scholarships, and students need to know how they tap into those institutional scholarships. As you are going through the admission process, you want to know whether or not that school considers all applicants for incoming student scholarships, or if there's an additional scholarship application to be considered for incoming student scholarships. So I would encourage all of our seniors to know what that process looks like for all of the institutions that you plan on attending. Those scholarships are normally very competitive, and they're going to be based on your performance in high school. However, there are also scholarships available at the institution that you can apply to receive even if you didn't get a scholarship coming in. So those scholarships sometimes come in the form of donor scholarships, or what we call foundation scholarships. And depending on where you're going to school, there's a process to tap into those dollars. So you want to visit that school's financial aid website and learn about how you apply for scholarships at that particular school or university. There are also a variety of different scholarship opportunities by way of community-based scholarships, anything from your church or religious group to sororities and fraternities to other service groups. You want to tap into all the free money that's available to you. I always encourage students to apply for any and all scholarships for which you meet the criteria. No scholarship is too small, and reach for the sky. No scholarship is too large. Here I've listed just a few scholarship search engines where you can find some scholarship opportunities, but I also don't want to forget to talk about our state scholarships, and our most common state scholarship is our Florida Bright Future Scholarship. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. When it comes to applying for scholarships, I always want to make sure that our students meet our deadlines. So you want to meet the deadline. You want to be ready to apply for any and all scholarships for which you meet the criteria. Get involved. There's much more to being a good scholarship candidate than just your grades and test scores. While that is often a consideration, a lot of times donors are looking to see that students are well-rounded, actively involved in the community, cultivating their interests. So that's a way to just increase the likelihood of getting scholarships. Also, complete the Fafsa. The Fafsa may not be required for all scholarships, but some scholarships do require that form is completed. And many scholarships require an essay. So here are just a few tips. If you have to write a scholarship essay, I encourage students to create a scholarship template. 2 paragraphs, 3 at most, that outline some of the things that all donors would want to know. So any accomplishments, awards, or anything like that you've received, If there's anything outstanding in terms of your academic achievements, you want to highlight that. Your interest, how you're cultivating your academic and career interests, and just maybe a couple of interesting things about you. And you use those paragraphs to formulate whatever essay you're writing, and you tweak it to meet the needs of the donor. I also tell students to create a scholarship resume, and this isn't something that you're actually going to print. This is literally just a bulleted list on a Word document of all the things that you do that make you a great scholarship candidate. So when you participate in a community service event, when you receive an accolade or award at school, when you join that new organization and you get that leadership role, you just go ahead and keep that bulleted list. 2 reasons. If you're a super active student, it's actually sometimes easy to forget all of the things that you're doing. And the second thing is, if you are a person that has a hard time tooting your own horn, many of us do, it's sometimes hard to get started to brag about yourself. So keeping that scholarship resume allows you to go back and see all the great things you're doing so that you have a starting point. And just some tips that we got from Chegg.com. Make sure you read the question when you're answering an essay and speak to what the donor is asking you. So I tell you to create a scholarship template. What I'm going to reiterate and stress is that I don't want you to write the same essay for each and every scholarship. It's a template. It's a starting point. You want to make sure you're answering what the donor is requesting. Be unique and uplifting. Try your best to tell a story that will captivate the readers, and then make sure you double check for grammar. A few things to remember: you want to look for scholarships often, and when I say often, I mean weekly or bi-weekly. You want to look for scholarships as often as possible and apply for any and all scholarships for which you meet the criteria. Create a dedicated file that includes some of the things that we talked about, so that you're always ready for the application process. And then make yourself stand out from the crowd. So then I want to talk a little bit about Bright Futures. Bright Futures is our state scholarship. It is available to students who are attending school here in the state of Florida. If you're attending a state university, Bright Futures will cover 100% of your cost per credit hours, including summer courses, up to 120 funded credit hours if you're an academic scholar. If you qualify at the medallion scholar level, Bright Futures will cover 75% of your tuition and fees at a state university cost per credit hour, including summer courses up to 120 funded credit hours. Just some things to mention about Bright Futures and what you need to do in order to meet the criteria. For this year, you must have a 3.5 GPA in order to get the academic scholar, and have either a 29 on the ACT or a 1330 on the SAT, and 100 service hours. And most recently, those service hours can include paid work hours for students who are employed. Additionally, if you're qualifying, if you're shooting for the medallion scholars, that's a 3.0 weighted GPA based on 16 high school courses, and those are the courses listed here: your English, your math, your natural science, social science, and your world language. They must be the same language. For 22-23, we need a 25 on the ACT or a 12-10 on the SAT. I encourage students to take both tests. The tests are different, and you may score higher, or they test different things. So you may score better on one test than the other. And you want to start taking your test as early as possible, because you may need to take additional tests to get to these levels. And the service hours for our medallion or merit scholars is a 75-hour credit limit. I'm sorry, community service limit. When it comes to Bright Futures, there is a one-time application. It's the Florida Financial Aid application. It is available on the Florida Student Financial Aid website. I will encourage our students to do this as soon as possible, but our schools do a really great job of getting our seniors to do this as groups quite often. So you want to make sure that you get this done. You have until August of after you graduate, but you don't want to wait until then. You want to go ahead and find out the type of state aid for which you qualified, including Bright Futures. In order to be considered for Bright Futures, you have to have that Florida Financial Aid application on file. I did want to talk a little bit about the Florida Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship. This scholarship isn't accepted at our state universities, but for students pursuing certain associate degrees, this is a different type of Bright Future Scholarship for vocational programs that can pay up to 48 dollars per credit hour based on the type of program that you're in. You do have to do the Florida financial aid application to be considered for this as well. You have some other requirements associated with the CAPE and Gold Seal Vocational Scholarship. But if you're interested in a vocational program, please explore this option to see if it's something for which you qualify. And then really quickly, I'm not going to harbor this, I'm not going to belabor this because you're not there yet, but there are renewal requirements for Bright Futures. So if you're an academic scholar, once you're at the college or university that you're attending, you do have to maintain a 3.0 GPA. And if you're a medallion scholar, you're maintaining a 2.75. And you do have to complete the coursework for which you receive Bright Futures funding. Really quickly, never pay for scholarship searches. Again, we want to make sure that you reach out to all of these free resources, utilize your resources at your high school and the state colleges and universities or any post-secondary school you're attending. You want to make sure that you're wary of anybody who is guaranteeing you anything, because it's really hard to guarantee scholarships. And then avoid giving your personal information. You want to just protect that information, as I mentioned with the Fsa Id. You want to also protect information when it comes to anything that's personally identifiable. Really quickly, I want to talk about grants. Grants are going to be based primarily on a student's need or the expected family contribution. Grants come from a variety of sources. Most commonly, we hear about the federal Pell Grant. The federal Pell Grant is going to be based on a student's expected family contribution, and then it's going to be prorated based on their enrollment status. And as the expected family contribution goes up, the Pell Grant goes down until we reach that maximum threshold for the Pell Grant. But there are other grants as well. There's the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. That is also a need-based federal grant. I'd like to highlight that grant for just 1 second and go back to the priority filing date. So at UCF, if a student is eligible for Pell Grant and files on October 30th before that December 1st priority filing date, the student may get consideration for the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. However, if that student filed their FAFSA on December 2nd, that is such a limited program that it is likely that that student will not be considered for that grant, even though they could have potentially gotten it had they filed earlier. So I just kind of wanted to drive home that point of the priority filing date. There are also some state grants, most commonly the Florida Student Assistance Grant. Again, it's going to be based on expected family contribution. And then our students who are considering private institutions and colleges in the state of Florida, there is the Effective Access to Student Education, or the EASE grant, formerly known as the FRAG grant, that could be awarded to students at their private institution. It's really important to find out what that process looks like at that school, because it does vary from one school to the next. I mentioned work study and student employment. This is a great opportunity for students to earn a portion of their financial aid package. Work study, I'm an advocate for, because it often reduces student loan debt because you're able to earn some money and maybe not borrow as much. I will also say that when you're doing the FAFSA, you want to indicate that you're interested in the work study program in order to be considered for it. If you don't indicate that, more than likely that school is not going to offer you work study. There are additional criteria for work study. It is another limited resource program. It is one of those programs that if you don't meet the priority filing date, depending on that school's need and availability of funding, they may not be able to offer you that program. Again, that's just my little plug for making sure you file by the school's priority filing date. And then I want to talk a little bit about student loans that are available to students and families based on federal programs. The direct student loans are not credit-based. They're going to be given to students based on being eligible for federally funded aid. There are two types of loans, and I mentioned those at the beginning of this session: the subsidized loan, which is need-based and does not accrue interest, and the unsubsidized loan that is not need-based. It's given to a student regardless of their expected family contribution. But it's going to be based on the student's dependency status and academic classification. And the next slide will show you the amounts that a student would be eligible to receive. However, there are times when a parent borrows on behalf of their student to assist with the educational expenses, and parents can borrow a federal loan. It is called the Federal Plus Loan. The Parent Plus Loan is a credit-based loan that allows parents to borrow up to the student's cost of attendance minus any other resources the student is receiving. So I wanted to just share what a freshman can borrow. So freshmen can borrow a total of $5,500 for the academic year. If a student has need, $3,500 of that can be the subsidized loan. And I think it's really important because student loan amounts in terms of federally funded loan are driven by the student's academic classification and their dependency status. So regardless of where you're going to school, if you're a dependent freshman, the maximum that you're going to get for that academic year is $5,500. I think that's just really important when you're looking at your financial aid award letters and thinking about the costs associated with going to school. So a couple more things. Tips for reducing student loan debt. You want to complete the FAFSA as early as possible each year and make sure that you meet your school's priority filing date. I think I've driven that home. I think you all will meet your school's priority filing date by now. You want to create a budget. And the reason why I say that is because you want to look at the resources you have available from all of the different sources, from your financial aid, if you're getting help from your family, from a job that you're working, and take into account all of those resources as well as all of your expenditures for a given semester. And that's really useful in helping you borrow only what you need, because you don't want to borrow just for the sake of borrowing. You want to borrow if you need to borrow and only borrow the amount that you need to borrow. And if you have an unsubsidized loan, one way to reduce the amount of interest that's accruing is to pay the interest quarterly. And then that way it doesn't do these two things that I'm a financial literacy nerd. It doesn't compound and capitalize. So what that means is that you don't pay interest on interest. So you want to go ahead and pay that if you can, if you're in a position to do that. Then you want to apply for scholarships. Often I have this saying, free money is good money. We want to get you a lot of free good money. So you want to put your name in the hat for that free money as often as possible. And just a few more things about financial aid, and then I'm going to open up the floor for questions. I mentioned special circumstances, and I wanted to make sure that I kind of bring this back home. We recognize that the FAFSA does not always capture a student's or a family's current situation. There are things that change, particularly when you're using tax and income information from 2 years prior. Loss of employment, death of a parent or a spouse, unusual medical expenses are a few that come to mind. Financial aid offices have the authority to exercise what we call professional judgment in these cases. This is done on a case-by-case basis, and each and every school has their own process. So depending on where you're going to school, you want to learn if you fall into one of these categories and the FAFSA just doesn't reflect your current situation, you want to learn what that school's professional judgment process looks like, and then go from there. Also, I mentioned dependency status earlier in the presentation, and I alluded to there are times when a student cannot answer yes to those questions, but they have a more complicated familial situation. We refer to that. It is a specific type of professional judgment in financial aid. It's called a dependency override. And so some cases that we see may be students who've been abandoned or abused or neglected or have complicated familial situations. And there is a process for that as well. So if you fall into any of these categories, you want to reach out to your school. Did want to mention verification. When I mentioned the data retrieval tool, I indicated that if a student is selected for verification, the data retrieval tool is a very useful tool in the verification process. However, if a student is selected for verification, what it essentially means is that that student may have to provide additional documentation to the Office of Financial Aid at the school that they are attending, and that information is going to be cross-referenced against the FAFSA. If you are selected for verification, you want to get that documentation in as soon as possible. And then really quickly, each school has what we call satisfactory academic progress, or SAP. We use a lot of acronyms in financial aid. And that's the criteria outlined for a student to continue to receive aid. So wherever you go to school, you want to learn about that school's SAP process. And then I talked about like renewal for Bright Futures, but a lot of other grants and scholarships have renewal criteria as well. So if you're the recipient of grants and scholarships, learn what that renewal criteria is for your awards. And that's the end of the presentation portion. I hope that the information I provided is useful. I absolutely believe that this is a learning experience, and the beautiful thing about learning is no one can take it away from you. So I hope that tonight you were able to learn a bit about financial aid. And I'm going to stop my share and turn the floor over to Mr. Cook for questions.
That was so good. I was like, man, okay, we getting you out to Osceola County real soon. So I jotted down a few, and we have some questions coming up in our back chat that I'll review. So I'm just going to kind of run through this in succession of how you present it. Going back to subsidized and unsubsidized loan, you mentioned half-time enrollment. What does that mean for everybody else out there that doesn't understand that terminology?
Thank you. So half-time enrollment is going to actually vary by institution. So at UCF, it is 6 credit hours for our undergraduate student because 12 credit hours is what establishes full-time enrollment. But half-time enrollment is determined by the institution. So it could vary from one school to the next.
Got you. Next, just for the audience out there in the back, can you give them some suggestions as to how to have an error-free FAFSA? Like, what are some tips to make sure when they do it the first time go around, it's done and it's done right?
That's a great question, Mr. Cook. So one of the things I would say is when you're doing the FAFSA, pay attention to the section you're in. So if you're in the student section and it says you, it is you, the student. So they're asking about your income, the student, your information. And for some, and as I mentioned in the presentation, for a lot of our students, those are zeros. And that's okay, but you want to make sure you're doing that accurately. I've seen FAFSAs where we get parental and student AGIs that are exactly the same. And we're like, that's probably not likely, right? So you want to make sure that you are answering the questions correctly, read the questions, utilize the data retrieval tool if you're eligible to use it, because that's going to input that tax information directly in there. That's less typing, less information that you could potentially transpose numbers or get the wrong information in there. So using the DRT tool, reading the questions in their entirety, ensuring that you're answering the questions for the right person on the FAFSA. A lot of times a parent might be driving and the student is sitting right next to them, and that you is the student, not the parent. So just doing those types of things are very helpful.
Yeah, Pedro, who works for our Office of Student Financial Aid, he's in the back answering questions, everybody. He said, put your real full name, first, last, and social security number. And what we found is people were using one name in the school system that was different than their birth certificate. So you want to make sure those lined up. You want to make sure it looks exactly like it does on your birth certificate. Yeah, like a dash, a space. If it's combined, a capital letter within the combined, like make sure it reflects that accurately.
If you have 2 last names and that's how it's legally written, you want to make sure you include both of them, all of that.
Then a couple of more things. FAFSA is the hot topic, right? What grade do students apply for their FAFSA?
Great question. Senior year. So October 1st of senior year is when the FAFSA opens. So that's when you're going to do the FAFSA. If you're a junior or a sophomore, you just got a bunch of great information, but it won't be applicable to you until senior year. You don't want to do it before then because you're not attending a post-secondary institution to be eligible for aid.
And you say FAFSA opens October 1st. How soon should they get the FAFSA done?
As soon as possible. Yesterday. Let's go.
You sound like me right now, October 1st, when it opens.
Right. But going back to those priority filing dates, if not, as soon as it opens, definitely by the priority filing date of the schools that you're interested in attending, the earliest one. So you want to get it done as soon as possible.
So I think we just answered this. Is there such a thing as filing out the FAFSA too early? Yes, prior to October 1st, senior year.
Correct. That is too early.
But after that is go time.
Go time. And the FAFSA does close. So for example, the 2021-22 FAFSA just closed. It's done. So, the FAFSA does close. It doesn't stay open indefinitely. So you can miss the window to complete the application. There's specific deadlines for when we can disperse federal aid. So you want to get it done early. I hope that answered the question.
No, it did. Another one that comes up quite often is people are scared to do the FAFSA because they think if they complete the FAFSA, it gives them a loan and it's automatic and now they're stuck with that loan. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Loans require active authorization. So you have to say, I want a loan through this institution or from the Federal Department of Education at this institution in order for us to give you a loan. What completing the FAFSA does is allow a school to determine your eligibility for financial aid at that particular institution. It allows the federal government to determine your financial aid for federally funded aid. So that's why I said when you do the student aid report, when you get that back, it's going to say, oh, you look like you're eligible for Pell Grant and loans, or you look like you're just eligible for federally funded loans. In that case, you have to actively take a step for those loans to be given to you. They're not going to be given to you unless you say, I'd want them. And each school has their own process for that. So that varies from school to school, but you have to initiate that process. That process isn't initiated just by completing the FAFSA.
Perfect. One more, well, we might have more because
I see a couple.
Yeah, one more FAFSA question and then we'll shift to Bright Futures. So can you fill out the FAFSA if you have not decided where you want to go?
Absolutely. So that school section asks for up to 10 schools. So you can be very undecided and say, you know what, I don't know which school I'm interested in quite yet. You have up to 10 schools that you can include there. The other piece to that is after those 10 schools have received that information, you can remove some of those schools and add additional schools later. So you can definitely still be in the decision-making process and get the FAFSA done. You want to get it done as soon as possible, and you can include any school that you think you might be attending or you're thinking about attending, up to 10 schools in the first go round.
Okay, then as it relates to Bright Futures, let's say a family has Florida prepaid. How does that affect Bright Futures?
It doesn't. And so Florida prepaid is a financial resource. It is not financial aid. So Florida prepaid is typically paid on behalf of a student by a family member, and is available for the student to tap into once that student is at a post-secondary institution in the state of Florida. That does not preclude the student from being eligible for Bright Futures. Florida prepaid is going to go towards tuition in terms of the charge on the student accounts that it goes towards, unless the student also has a housing plan. While Bright Futures is going to be based on tuition. So Bright Futures is based on the cost per credit hour at the school that the student is attending and the tier of Bright Futures that the student is receiving. While it is based on tuition, it doesn't have to necessarily pay tuition. So Bright Futures can go towards other charges on the student's account. So if the student has Florida prepaid and Florida prepaid is covering the vast majority of their tuition, when their Bright Futures hits, Bright Futures can go to the remaining balance of their tuition, because Florida prepaid never covers 100% of tuition. There's always a little bit left over. So it can go towards the remaining balance of the tuition and then either be applied to another item on the student's account. So let's say that's if that student is at a state university and in housing, Bright Futures can go towards that as well. Or if the student doesn't have any other charges, they just have tuition at that school, they don't live on campus, they don't have anything else, no meal plan, anything like that, the student can get their Bright Futures refunded to them to use for any other educational expense included in the cost of attendance. And I see Mr. Hernandez typing away, so I'm gonna see.
Yeah, you're getting these. A lot of questions came up about who to include on FAFSA as it relates to IRS, salary and all of that. What parent, what guardian do you include? And I know that this is like mucky waters, but can you succinctly put that in there, or maybe we share a resource for people to go to?
No, I can actually. So for the 2023-24 FAFSA, students should be using the parent with whom the student resided with for the majority of the 12 months preceding the completion of the FAFSA. In regard to when the student is completing the FAFSA, what parent to use, it's going to be that parent, the custodial parent, typically. I do recognize that there are some students who have 50-50 situations with the parental custody.
Mm-hmm.
In those cases, you're going to go with the parent who provides more financial support if that's the case. If it's even, then the student is going to choose the parent. Because if it's exact, and I'll be very honest, there are very few cases where it's exactly the same. So we're literally talking about 50-50 financial, 50-50 time spent. But what we're looking at is the custodial parent, the parent with whom the student resided with for the vast majority or for the majority of the 12-month period preceding completing the FAFSA. The other thing I wanted to share, and I mentioned this in the presentation, is if that parent is remarried, we do need step parent information as well. Step parent information, regardless of whether the step parent provides actual financial support, it's included as a part of the household.
Okay, here's another one that came up because we know this can get a little tricky as well. So going back to those additional money that comes in for a parent. So let's say a parent is receiving child support, it's inconsistent. Do they still include that on the FAFSA?
So the FAFSA is going to ask for how much child support you received in the year. So even if it's inconsistent, it's going to ask for a total amount. So, you know, if there's supposed to be an amount that you get monthly and you only got it 3 times that year, then you would include the amount that you received for that particular financial year associated with that FAFSA.
You are just, girl, get it. Going back, something that you mentioned that I knew came up, especially for families that maybe don't have a social whatever, you mentioned putting in all zeros at one point. Can you circle back to that?
Sure. That's specifically for the parent. The student must have a valid social security number. I also want to talk specifically about our DACA and TPS students. So I'm going to do 2 things here with that question. A parent does not have to be an eligible citizen or non-citizen to complete the FAFSA. A parent can use all zeros, no harm, no foul. Students do go through a Social Security match when they complete the FAFSA. So there is the Social Security Administration sends back, yes, this person with this Social Security number and name match is valid and thus eligible for federal aid. So that's one of the reasons a student must have a valid Social Security number. For our DACA and TPS students, they are not eligible to receive federally funded aid. So there are some other resources. One that comes to mind is a scholarship source called the dream.us. And if I share it in the chat, I don't know if we can share that with the attendees. That is a resource specifically developed for our students who are of DACA status. There are some participating institutions, UCF is one of the participating institutions, that allows for students to get some financial support if they fall into one of those categories. The other thing I would share is that private scholarships often do not have the stipulation of citizenship or eligible non-citizenship status. So unless a private scholarship explicitly states that is solely for a citizen or eligible non-citizen, I encourage all students to put their name in the hat for that. And there are also some private loan opportunities depending on the student status as well. So that's what I wanted to share for our students who may be DACA or TPS, and I will get that link for the dream.us now.
Yeah, and Peter, our OSFA rep, said to mention that still both DACA, TPS should complete the FFAA, which traditionally people refer to as the Bright Futures, right? Because if there's any changes, they may reinstate that Bright Futures and they could receive that.
Correct. I would agree. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. And I'm sending that link to, I sent it. It looks like it's delayed going through, but I'm sending the link to the dream.us, and that's a great resource for our students who may be undocumented to maybe tap into some opportunities for funding.
And we touched on that Bright Futures. One of our participants said, I just want to make sure I heard that correct. Bright Futures can cover more than tuition, because they always thought tuition and fees was the only thing that Bright Futures covered.
Let me be very clear. Bright Future is going to be based on your tuition. It will not exceed the cost per credit hour times the number of credit hours you are taking. So Bright Futures is a tuition-based scholarship, meaning if you're taking 12 credit hours at UCF and you're an academic scholar, you're going to get $212.28 times 12 credit hours for the semester applied to your student account. So it's going to be based specifically on your cost per credit hour, but it can go to other charges. So if your tuition is covered by another type of resource, such as Florida Prepaid, Bright Futures can cover another charge. And Mr. Hernandez wanted me to express explicitly, it does cover the cost per credit hour, not additional fees. It's simply the cost per credit hour, either at the 100% for our academic scholars or at 75% of the cost per credit hour at that institution for our merit medallion scholars.
Okay, let's see. I think we're right at time. Even though there's more questions, listen, y'all, there are resources for you. OSFA has contacts. You can reach out to Mr. Hernandez. He can help walk y'all through it. If you're in Osceola County, we have a college and career counselor at every high school that can walk you through it. We have a team that works specifically on FAFSA that can help guide you through all of those nuances that y'all are asking. We've got Dr. Karima on here. She can help y'all answer questions. Like, doesn't have to stop here. Y'all can reach out to us and we'll be more than glad to help answer any questions that y'all still have. But in honor of time, we're going to close it out tonight. We want to thank y'all for being on with us. We do want to point out two things. So if you need FAFSA assistance, you can go to, there are two opportunities this month. So actually this Wednesday, there are a few districts that are doing a live FAFSA session. If you go to, I'm going to put it in the chat, www.osceolaschools.net/CCLR. You'll find the FAFSA live session. You can select that, jump in. We have financial aid assistance that will help walk you through FAFSA beginning to end. And then we are, as a state, this partnership, we're doing another live session October 19th, where we'll help you fill out your FAFSA, same time, 6 to 7. You can scan the QR code on your screen, and that will take you to the website where you can register for that evening's event. So you can join us this Wednesday, or you can join us next Wednesday, and we'll help get your FAFSA done. And as I said, if y'all need any assistance, you can reach out to the people that were on here tonight. We'll be more than glad to help y'all. So we're going to sign off for tonight. We'll either see y'all this Wednesday for FAFSA, or we'll see y'all next Wednesday for FAFSA. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Right.